This month, Life Insurance Strategies Group has returned to Mexico City. I want to talk about one of the subjects that keeps coming up over and over again, and it has something to do with private placement life insurance. Now, I know we've talked quite a bit about private placement life insurance, but it is a hot product at the moment. I think we've talked before that as much private placement life insurance has been placed in the last 4 years that have been placed in the 30 years before that in the United States. So there's a lot of interest in it. And you know, there's a couple rules around private placement life insurance. One of them is the investor control doctrine. It says that the policy owner, the insured or related party, cannot have any control over that policy, the investments that are in that policy. So I get calls all the time with different scenarios saying, do you think this is investor control? Well, let's start exactly, what is investor control in the law at the moment? So we have the Weber Tax Court decision from 2015. Now, this is where a client and their investment advisor, the client had passed away. The emails were subpoenaed by the IRS, and they showed, I think it was 60 to 70,000 communications between the client and the investment manager about the investments in the policy. So definitely an investor control violation. What the Weber decision tells us are three things. Who has the power to pick the investments? Who has the power to exercise the rights around the securities in the investments? And who has the power to extract money from the investments, not counting policy withdrawals and distributions. But a lot of people forget about an old private letter ruling that came out around 1983 that talked about no prearranged plan for the policy. So that means coming up with a plan of what investments to do ahead of putting that policy into place. And that's where a lot of PPLI transactions where people are thinking about, oh, is this investor control? Or yeah, it probably actually is if you've come up with some kind of plan or scheme to do some sort of specific investment that's not an insurance dedicated fund underneath the policy. So for instance, we see a lot of people doing these option strategies where they're told, hey, issue options on your business, put them into a policy when there's no basis, so there's no tax on that transfer. And then when those options pop, that value will be captured within the policy. Now, let's just say let's take it through the transaction, how that might be okay. I'm not saying it is. Let's say a company is thinking about doing options. An independent investment manager that works with the shareholder says, hey, look, when your company issues options, a good place for those to be would be in a PPLI policy. Now, it's still not saying that's not investor control, but it's certainly not the way these transactions are going down today, where there's a prearranged plan and certainly communications that are discoverable between the investment manager, the client, and even the insurance company about the plan. So look, variable products are supposed to be hands-off, and private placement life insurance is a variable product. So remember, there's two types of investments that you can make inside of private placement life insurance. Insurance dedicated funds, which has a look-through. That is a separate legal entity, so you can select the insurance dedicated funds, but obviously you can't have a say of what's actually invested in those insurance dedicated funds. And then the other investment option under a policy is a separately managed account, where you have an independent investment manager selecting investments. So again, you can't have a say in what those individual investments are. And that's really black and white what private placement should be when it comes to the investor control doctrine. Now remember, at Life Insurance Strategies Group, we don't sell products. We help our individual and institutional clients make decisions involving complex life insurance transactions. And if we can help you, reach out to us today at lifeinsurancestrategiesgroup.com.